Prabhuji,
ಅಮ್ಮ ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ.
Prabhu, the Excel sheet for attendance we are not able to update.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Prabhuji, it's working. I just updated.
It's working, Prabhuji.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dhanuvat
Voice audible?
Not much clear, Prabhuji.
Is it better now?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayan Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatangitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanitamcha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauradvishe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namosude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So welcome all the devotees for our Bhakti Shastri session. Can you please enable screen sharing?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji, I gave you the permissions. Prabhuji.
Okay. So we are entering into the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And as we remember, we discussed in the 13th chapter that the verse number 22 of the 13th chapter is a seed verse for the whole section. So we'll just review this so that we are in sync with what we are studying. So first thing is we saw that every tree has a seed, and material tree has grown from the desire to enjoy of living entity. So this is the seed, the desire to enjoy. Bhunte or bhoktutve were the words used that time. Hare Krishna, I'm audible now?
Yes, Prabhu.
So this is a seed, and then we saw that the three modes of material nature is the water, which nourishes that tree or that seed rather, and then the tree is grown, and that is explained in chapter 14. So the seed was explained in chapter 13, and three modes were explained in chapter 14. Then the tree itself is explained in the 15th chapter, and how to cut down that tree. Asanga shastrena didena chitva. And in the 16th chapter, we'll see the extremes of the tree, the upper and the lower parts. And then Arjuna will ask, what about in between? So that will be explained in the 17th chapter. And then finally, the 18th chapter explains the summary of the whole Gita. So that is a very big chapter. All other chapters are very small, like 15th is 20 verses, 16 is also somewhere around 24 or something like that, 17 is also in 20 25 something, and 18th is biggest. So this is just brief summary. And then last chapter we saw how the soul is conditioned by the modes, was discussed in the 13 verses, and then what is the effect of that conditioning. And then last section we saw how the living entity can transcend the three modes. So are there any questions in regard to the last chapter? Last time it was a little late, so maybe some people did not take up. Okay, fine. So we'll go ahead. So one thing I wanted to share last time, but because of lack of time I could not, is this, that we saw in the 14th chapter from verse number 22 to 25, Krishna mentions the symptoms of a person who has transcended the modes. You remember Arjuna asked this question that what are the symptoms of a person who has transcended kim achara, what are his behavior, and then finally he asked how to transcend the three modes. These are the three questions put up by Arjuna in the last section, and to answer that, then Krishna explains in verse number 22, 23, 24 and 25 the internal symptoms of the person who has transcended the modes and what is his behavior in the 24 and 25. So these are something similar which what Krishna already explained in the 12th chapter, the qualities of a devotee. So we'll just see the parallels. Like you see here in the chapter 12 from verse number 13 to 20, Krishna explains various qualities of a devotee. and they are quite similar to that what Krishna speaks here in chapter 14. So here in 13th verse, Krishna says, Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam, that he is not envious to all living entities. And here it is mentioned Na Dveshti. Obviously, here the reference is to he is not envious or he does not desire a particular situation which is predominant by a particular mode. So that way it is there. And then the next in the 12th chapter, verse number 15, it explains Harsha Marsha Bhayod Vegair, that he is equipoised in happiness and distress. Similarly, here in chapter 14, it is mentioned Udasinavat, is neutral to the changes in the modes. So when modes are changing, there is obviously sometimes happiness and sometimes there is distress. So, but he is Udasinvat, who? One who has transcended. And then again, in 12th chapter, we see in the 17th verse, Na Rushyati, Na Shochati. So that is mentioned. And here in chapter 14, it is mentioned, Tulya Priya Apriya. I'll read the exact phrase. So here it is Tulya Priya Priyo Dhiraha. So whatever things which are Priya or Apriya, so he is equal to them. Here also, Na Rushyati, Na Shochati, he doesn't lament, he doesn't becomes immediately happy or something like that. And again in 18th verse of the 12th chapter, Shatru equal to
Prabhu, your voice is not coming clearly.
chapter. Seems the problem in the internet. Just a minute. Is it better now?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Some static, Prabhu, but it's better, Prabhu.
So I was mentioning that Tulya Mitrari Pakshe in the 25th verse of the 14th chapter, Krishna is mentioning that he is equal to friends and enemies. Then again in 18th verse of the 12th chapter, it is mentioned Tatha Manapa Manayo is equal to Man and Apaman, honor and dishonor. And same thing here is mentioned in the Manapa Manayos Tulya, equal to Man and Man. Again 19th verse in the 12th chapter, Tulya Ninda Stutir Mauni. Here also Tulya Nindatma Samstutihi. And then 16th verse of 12th chapter mentions Sarvaramba Parityagi. And 25th verse of 14th chapter mentions Sarvaramba Parityagi. He gives up all kinds of material endeavors. And then at the end of every verse in the 12th chapter, Krishna is saying Yomad Bhakta Same Priyaha, that such a person who is devotee, who is my devotee, who is possessing all such qualities, is very dear to me. And here in the 14th chapter, Krishna says that Gunatitha Sa Uchyate. Such a person is considered to be transcended the three modes. So practically what I wanted to say is whatever the qualities Krishna is mentioning about the person who has transcended the modes is nothing but the qualities of a devotee, which Krishna has already glorified in the 12th chapter. So quite interesting. And that's why we see that in the 14th chapter in the beginning, Krishna already said, Bhuyaha, I am explaining it again to you. So this is how things are quite repeated here. No, sorry, at the beginning of 13th chapter, Krishna says Bhuyaha, that I am repeating. So things are quite repeating here. We can see like that. Okay, fine. So now let's go to the overview of this 15th chapter. So we see that in 14.26, Krishna says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. That there are ways to transcend these three modes, but the best among them is performing bhakti. And how? Avyabhicharini bhakti, unbreaking, unfailing devotional service. And if one is able to perform that, then one may reach the stage of Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. And we saw that Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate is a stage of complete liberation, wherein the living entity gets the full knowledge and is freed from conditionings. So that stage, when he attains, then he is eligible to go back to Godhead. And Krishna in 14.27 also mentions that basically he is the whole basis of the Brahman. So now that we saw through these two verses, we saw that Krishna is inspiring the jivas in this material world to develop love and attachment towards him, towards the process of devotional service. But at the same time, one should also learn how to develop detachment from this material world. And that is what will be explained in this particular chapter. Also, this chapter helps us to understand that how this avyabhicharini bhakti, which was explained in the 14th chapter, leads to the Param Purusha, the Supreme Person. So in this particular chapter, Krishna is comparing Samsara to a banyan tree. And then we'll see further things, how Krishna is comparing these various parts of the tree to various things in this material world. So in the beginning of the first, in the beginning purport of the first verse, Srila Prabhupada says that after discussion of the importance of Bhakti Yoga, one may question, what about the Vedas? It is explained in this chapter that the purpose of Vedic study is to understand Krishna. Yeah. So now let's see the chapter overview. So from verse number 1 to 6, we are going to see that how from material world to spiritual world we can go is by detachment and surrender. So this is the first section. Then the second section from 7 to 11 mentions, if there is no detachment, then what happens? Bondage and transmigration. And then from verse number 12 to 15, we learn to appreciate Krishna as our maintainer in all circumstances in this material world. And 16 to 18 is a summary of Vedanta, also called as Tri Shloki Gita. And finally, 19 and 20, it gives us that knowing Krishna means knowing everything. So yes, now let us proceed ahead in discussing the first verse of the 15th chapter. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Urdhva Moolam Adha Shakham Ashvatham Prahuravyayam Yastam Veda Saveda Ved. Translation.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Translation. The Supreme Personality of God had said, it is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
So, as we just discussed previously, that Krishna is comparing this material world, the samsara, to a banyan tree. And he is giving that it is an imperishable banyan tree. And what are the characteristics of this banyan tree? That it has its roots upward and its branches down. And the leaves of this tree are nothing but the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is a knower of Vedas means not that one should just know the Vedas, but knowing this tree also means how to bring down this tree. So that is the important discussion which Krishna is going to help us to lead in. Yes. So the entanglement of this material world is compared here to banyan tree. Why? Because we see a banyan tree, it is like very huge. It has many branches. It has got subsidiary roots, and again from that there are many branches comes over. So just like in this photo which we are seeing, like that, the banyan tree is very, very huge. If we go to Bhubaneswar, there is a big banyan tree there. So like that, there are many places where are big banyan trees, and it is very, very difficult to, if you consider a small ant on any branch of the tree, so for that ant to find out the real root of the tree would be very difficult. It's not very sure also whether the ant will reach on the root or not. The ant may go from one branch to another and continue her life like that without actually finding the root of the tree. So we have to see like that in the perspective of the ant. So like that, a living entity is in this material world is like that. Is just simply because of the fruitive activities, he is jumping from one branch to another. And by that he is not actually able to reach the root of this great tree. So because the person is not able to find the end of this tree, so he becomes attached to whatever things are there in front of him, and hence there is no possibility of liberation for such a person. So conditioned soul is not able to find the end of the tree. He simply, because of his fruitive activities, jumping over from one place to another. And because of the attachment to particular fruitive activities, then he continues that. Because of that, then he goes to another branch. Then he does more further activities, goes to another branch. And in this way, he is not able to find the end of the tree, and there is no possibility of liberation. So this is what, in essence, Krishna is talking about an upside down tree, which root of which is Brahma Loka. Srila Prabhupada explains this in the purport. And the leaves are Vedic hymns. So the question arises, have you ever seen a tree like this upside down? So yes, anyone can say whether anyone has seen such a tree anytime?
Shadow in a lake.
Yes, the answer is yes, within reflection. We all have seen such a tree within reflection. So this is the reflection of the tree, which we all have seen in the lake or something like that. But the real tree is there at a different place. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, very big purport, that how the root of this tree is a total material substance from topmost to down. And then the many branches are various planetary systems. And the fruits are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Like that. Then further Srila Prabhupada explains that water is the desire on which the reflection takes place. So we see that water is what? Water is the place where the reflection of the tree is happening. Similarly, desire of the living entity is causing the reflection of the real tree or making this tree upside down. But there are impersonalists. What they say that Brahman is the root. Then from that comes Purusha and Prakriti. Then comes the three gunas. Then comes the Panchamahabhutani. Then comes the Indriyani, or the 10 senses. In this way, there are 24 elements, and that's it. That's the end of that. That is what impersonally say. And Srila Prabhupada puts a very nice argument in the purport that if the Brahman is the root, if Brahman is the root and reflection is the material world with Prakriti and Purusha in that, that means there must be the original tree. And that original tree is nothing but the spiritual world, where also we see Prakriti and Purusha. But in the real situation, the Prakriti and Purusha in this material world, Prakriti is the same, but the Purusha is the living entity who has taken up the mood of being an enjoyer. That is called as Purusha here. But in the spiritual world, the original Purusha is the Supreme Lord and Prakriti is the Jivatma and all other energies of the Lord. So this is how Srila Prabhupada wonderfully explains that if Brahman is the root, then it at 180 degree, if we turn around, then what we are seeing here is the perverted reflection of what it is actually there in the spiritual world. But this is, they don't accept. So they say that only this is the reflection and everything ends up in Brahman. But Srila Prabhupada gives, using their own analogy, says if the root is the, Brahman is the root, that means Brahman acts as the zero axis, and in minus 180 degrees reflection, then in plus 180 degrees is the real spiritual world. Yes, somebody can read this part of the purport displayed on the screen.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Yeah, go ahead, Mataji.
The difference between the spiritual and material manifestation is that the former is eternal and the latter is temporary. A reflection is temporary, for it is sometimes seen and sometimes not seen. But the origin from whence the reflection is reflected is eternal. The material reflection of the real tree has to be cut off. When it is said that a person knows the Vedas, it is assumed that he knows how to cut off attachment to this material world. If one knows that process, he actually knows the Vedas. One who is attracted by the ritualistic formulas of the Vedas is attracted by the beautiful green leaves of the tree. He does not exactly know the purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas, as disclosed by the personality of Godhead himself, is to cut down this reflected tree and attain the real tree of the spiritual world.
Thank you. So here Srila Prabhupada very nicely summarizes the whole understanding about this tree of samsara, which Krishna is explaining in this particular verse. So Prabhupada mentions this, when it is said a person knows the Vedas, it is assumed that he knows how to cut off the attachment to this material world. That is the real understanding of knowing the Vedas. Not getting simply attracted by the beautiful green leaves of the tree, which are nothing but the ritualistic formulas mentioned in the Vedas. That if you do this, you can go to this heaven. If you do that, you can get some nectar. And if you do this, then you can get a long life, and etc., etc. So all this thing, what will happen? Simply the living entity will jump from one branch to another. That's it. But he cannot cut the tree. So Srila Prabhupada is mentioning here that if one knows that process, he actually knows the Vedas. So now further Krishna will explain more characteristics of this tree in next verse. Adhascha urdhvam prasutastasya shakha guna pravruddha vishaya pravala adhascha mulanyanusantani karmanubandhini manushaloke. Translation.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. The branches of this tree extend downwards and upwards, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Hare Krishna.
Yes. So as we mentioned, that the reflection is happening on water. And what is that water compared to?
Desires.
Yes,
Desire.
desire. So if there is no desire, means desire for what? Desire to enjoy independently. So if there is no desire to enjoy independently, or if there is no desire to lord it over, then there is no existence of material world for such a living entity. That means that is a liberated soul. But till the time that desire to enjoy or desire to lord it over material nature is there, then for such a living entity, which we call as conditioned soul, the material existence is there. So here Krishna is explaining more wonderfully how this tree is. Yeah, I forgot to put animation. Anyways, the branches which go up and down, they are like planets with different species. Planets with different species. And then the lower parts of the branches are the humans, animals, birds, beasts, etc. And upper parts of the branches, they are the demigods, Gandharvas, and all other living beings. Root is the Brahma Loka. Guna Pravruddha. So this verse mentions Adascha Urdhvam Prasutas Tasya Shakha. That the Shakha, the branches have gone from Adha and Urdhva. They have gone up and down. So that's why this three line explains the this word. And Guna Pravruddha means it is nourished by gunas, three gunas, the three modes. Vishaya Pravalaha, the twigs are the sense objects. The twigs of the branches are the sense objects. And at the tip of the twig are the senses attached to sense objects. So that is a comparison given. And then Adhascha Mulani, Anusantatani. There are some other secondary roots. So what these secondary roots are doing? Karmanu Bandhini. They are keeping the living entities bound. How? By attachment and aversion. By attachment and aversion. Attachment to those things which the conditioned living entity like based on the modes. And again, aversion to some things which conditioned living entity do not like according to the modes. And then we also mentioned the fruits are nothing but the dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and avyayam. This tree is eternal. It does not go away without the discriminating knowledge from Gita. So that is all to be understood, the various characteristics of this tree, which Srila Prabhupada has explained in the first paragraph of this purport. And second paragraph, yeah, obviously. So yes, somebody can read this part of the purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I'll read.
Yes.
Sometimes we find that a tract of land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes a tract is very green. Similarly, where particular modes of material nature are proportionately greater in quantity, the different species of life are manifested accordingly. The tendencies towards piety and impiety are considered to develop from these secondary roots, which spread in all directions. The real root is from Brahmaloka, and the other roots are in the human planetary systems. After one enjoys the results of various activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and reviews his karma by fruitive activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities.
So, so this is how we see that because of pious, impious activity, the Jivatma, the conditioned soul, is traveling various places in this material world, and he comes down to earth. Very nicely, Prabhupada is mentioning here, he comes down to his earth and renews his karma. Or it is like, recharge your mobile. So once your mobile has exhausted with data, then you have to go to the store or something and then recharge your data so that you continue. So similarly, the conditioned living entity, after he exhausts all his pious, impious activity, again comes back to earthly planet and then recharges himself with fresh stock of karma, and then he goes back again to continue his lording it over material nature activities. So this is how living it is traveling Brahmanda Brahmite. He is traveling all over the Brahmanda, and sometimes even to some other Brahmandas. For so many Anadi, from Anadi time, the time immemorial. You cannot even trace out since when this all is happening. So after reading all this, a kind of fear develops in our heart. Oh, this has been there for so long. I had been here also for so long. So, but the point is everything that even after hearing all this, Arjuna was also bewildered. What is all this? But then Krishna is saying, don't be bewildered by the description. Understand the purpose of this tree. You cannot understand this tree, but you can understand the purpose of this tree. So that Krishna explains in the next verse. Na rupamasye hatatopalabhyate. Pranto na chadir na cha sampratishtha. Ashvatthamenam suvirudhamulam. Sangshastrena dridena chitva. Tata padam tat parimargitavyam. Gatana nivartanti bhuyaha. Ameva chadyam purusham prapadye. Yata pravrutti prasruta purani. Translation.
Krishna Prabhu.
Yes,
The
please.
real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. Hare Krishna.
Oh, thank you very much. So Krishna is mentioning here that real form of the tree cannot be perceived. Now the question arises, if one cannot know the real form of the tree, if one cannot know nanto na chadir na cha sampratishtha na anta na cha adir, he cannot know the end, he cannot know the beginning. Then the question arises, Krishna is saying asanga shastrena dridena chitva, cut out this tree. What he should cut out? Savirudha moolam. He should cut the root of the tree. But the question is, if it doesn't know where is the beginning and where is the end, then how can one cut down the tree? Yes, any thoughts on this?
So Bhakti Prabhuji.
No, we are giving the solution. So that is a solution. But the point is, if one doesn't know the beginning and the end, so where the roots are, that also doesn't know. So how to cut the roots? If roots are, where are the roots?
By not watering it.
Give up all desire.
I think
Yes,
the
yes, very
attachment,
good.
yeah,
Very
the
good. Give up
detachment.
all the desires.
We
That is the answer.
should stop nourishing it, Prabhuji.
Yes, very good. So the point is, Krishna has already mentioned that desire, the desire to lord it over the material nature, is the cause. We saw that it is compared with the water where the reflection happens. So the desire is where we have to curb. So we have to learn to curb the desire to lord it over material nature. Now the questioner is how to do that. So that Krishna is mentioned here. How? Asanga shastrena dridena chitva. Asanga shastrena. We heard that verse in 13.22. Karanam guna sangosya sadasat janma yonisu. There Krishna is mentioning that because of association with the guna, what has happened? He has to take up the lower and higher forms of the life in this samsara. But here now Krishna is saying that asanga shastrena. Now instead of becoming guna sangasya, don't be attached to the gunas, don't be attached to the things of this world because of the influence of gunas, rather become detached. Take up the axe of detachment and sharpen it with determination. If you sharpen your axe with determination, then that can cut this tree of material existence. That means that can cut the desire to lord it over material nature. So what will happen if one cuts down this tree? Tata padam tat parimargitavyam. Yasmin gatana nivartanti bhuya. If you have cut the tree, then you have to find some other shelter. This tree was giving everything. So now this tree is not there, or it is not going to be there any longer. So then unless one sees a better prospect, how will one cut down the tree? So that's why Krishna is saying that you take to that place, tata padam tat parimargitavyam. Take those paths wherein already some personalities have traveled. Yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuya. Once you go there, there is no need to come back. And what you do after reaching there? Tameva chadyam purusham prapadye. Take shelter of the purusham, purna purusha, yata pravrutti prasruta purani. So that is how the first thing one has to do is take the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So basically, Krishna is telling to take shelter or surrender oneself. First of all, he is telling that with the axe of detachment, sharpened by determination, you cut down the roots of this tree and then take and surrender yourself to lotus feet of Krishna. So root of the tree, sometimes there are some, it is said that some jewels are also found. So what is the jewel at the root of this tree? The jewel of the lotus feet of Krishna. So take shelter of those lotus feet of the Krishna. So this is what is mentioned in this particular verse. And Srila Prabhupada mentions this thing in the purport about the asanga. So let's read that. Yes, please read this part of the purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. The word asanga is very important in this connection because the attachment for sense enjoyment and lording it over the material nature is very strong. Therefore, one must learn detachment by discussion of spiritual science based on authoritative scriptures, and one must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. As a result of such discussion in the association of devotees, one comes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then the first thing one must do is surrender to him. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, so the point is that it's not that after cutting the tree, then you have to find out and go to that place from where you don't have to come back and then surrender to the Lord. But Srila Prabhupada is making it more clear to us that here itself, while you are already in some extent or the other, already attached to this material world, at that, in this situation only, you have to learn to take association of those who are liberated. So Sangha is that, being attached and taking association of those who are liberated. Sadhu Sangha. So by that, what will happen is one will learn from, hear from such persons and authoritative sources, and then he will reach to the point of surrendering himself to the Supreme Lord through that sadhu or through that guru, like that. So that is a process which Krishna is mentioning, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning through the words of Krishna. So then one may ask that how to do this surrender, or how can we fully surrender ourselves to the lotus feet of Krishna? So that Krishna explains in the next verse. Nirmana moha jita sanga dosha vidya vinivritta kama Tvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha samnyer Gacchantya mudha padamavyayam tat. Translation.
Hare Krishna. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Hare Krishna.
Okay. So here we can see Krishna is telling the process of surrender. How one can do this process of surrender, or in other words, what are the qualifications to surrender? That is another way we can understand this. So here it is said, Nirmana moha jita sanga dosha. One who has nirmana moha, one who has given up the false pride of lording it over the material nature, and jita sanga dosha, one who has conquered over the sanga dosh. What is the sanga dosh? Can anyone say?
Attachment with gunas.
Non-devotee association.
No. Somebody else said.
Association. Gunas. Attachment with gunas you mentioned in the previous page.
Yes, that's right. Jita sanga dosha means the faults which arises due to the association with the modes. So one who has conquered that. So in other sense, one who has become trigunatita, like we saw in a previous verse, previous chapter, how to go beyond the three modes, so that person. And when one is in this, given up one's false pride, and one has learned to not get affected by the modes, then adhyatma nitya, then he can actually learn spiritual science in a more focused way and better way. And until then, what happens is we are so much carried away by the mind's wandering, because of the modes and because of having this false pride. Because of that, we are not able to focus even in our Krishna consciousness, be it chanting, be it hearing from spiritual authorities, or be it reading the books of Srila Prabhupada. So all these things causes problems in our life. But if we have given up this false pride, if we are learned to conquer over the faults arising of the modes of material nature, and then the practice of devotional service becomes very easy. And vinivritta kama, that is yet another point, that one who has completely given up the desire for sense gratification. And dvandvair vimuktaha. So just if you reflect of these qualities based on what we discussed just a few minutes ago in the beginning of the class, the qualities mentioned in the 14th chapter of a person who has transcended the modes, or the qualities of Krishna mentioning about the devotee who is very dear to him. So we find this is similar way, Dvandvair vimukta. He is given up, or he is not bothered over. He's not. He's neutral towards the dvandva, dualities of this material world, like sukha dukkha. So he is equal to all those things. Gachanti amudha padam avyayam tat. So such a person who is unbewildered, he can reach that padam avyayam, that place, that avyayam place, that eternal kingdom he can reach. So time and again we find that Krishna is emphasizing on these qualities, saintly qualities. So that is what is required in our practice of Krishna consciousness also. And as it is mentioned in 13th chapter also, in the process of Gyan, or in 12th chapter, Mayar Pita Mano Buddhir, or in the 13th chapter, it is mentioned that one who has surrendered unto me, so they are the primary ones. If that is there, then all other saintly qualities gradually develop. So one has to learn to fully take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, the primary thing to do in the life. And then all other qualities, yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana, all other qualities will gradually follow. So that is what is expected. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning, please somebody can read this.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. When
Yes,
one
please.
is freed from such, when one is freed from such a false notion, he becomes free from all the false association caused by familial, social, and national affections. These faulty associations bind one to this material world. After this stage, one has to develop spiritual knowledge. One has to cultivate knowledge of what is actually his own and what is actually not his own. And when one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. He becomes full in knowledge. Then it is possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna.
So this is what can see. Prabhupada is also summarizing everything what Krishna has mentioned in this particular verse. So in this particular thing, we also can understand this vinivritta kama. This word is very, very important, because senses, they are called as sometimes ruthless masters. Because however you serve these senses, they are never satisfied, and they always want more and more. So that is why that is mentioned in one very nice verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 22.16. If you want, you can note it down. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 22.16. The translation goes as follows: O my Lord, there is no limit to the unwanted orders of lusty desires. Although I have rendered these desires so much service, they have not shown any mercy to me. I have not been ashamed to serve them, nor have I ever desired to give them up. O my Lord, O head of Yadu dynasty, recently, however, my intelligence has been awakened, and now I am giving them up. Due to transcendental intelligence, I now refuse to obey the unwanted orders of these desires. And I now come to you to surrender myself at your fearless lotus feet. Kindly engage me in your personal service and save me. So this is what is expected even when we chant the holy name of the Lord, that we pray such a way to the Lord that let me always be engaged in your service, in the service of your devotees, and not to these ruthless masters called as the senses and the mind, who are simply troubling me for so much of my lifetimes. So let me now, because now I have awakened by the mercy of my spiritual master, so let me now be engaged in your service. Okay. So Krishna mentioned about this Gachanti Muda Padam Abhyayam Tat. He mentioned that you should, by surrendering process, When you develop these qualities, you can fully surrender. And when you surrender, then you go to that padam, which is avyayam. So how is that padam? How is that place that Krishna will describe in the next verse? Na tad bhasayate suryo
भासयते सूर्यो
na shashanko na pavakah
न शशाङ्को न पावकः
yat gatva na nivartante
यद्गत्वा न निवर्तन्ते
kama paramam mama.
तद्धाम परमं मम.
Translation.
Krishna Prabhuji, that supreme abode of mine is not illuminated by the sun or the moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never returns to this material world. Hare Krishna.
So here Krishna, Srila Prabhupada, while in translation, for Surya, he is saying sun. For Shashanka, he is saying moon. And Pavakaha, which is actually fire, Prabhupada is adding fire or electricity. So one may be wondering from where this word electricity has come. So the answer is that in one of the Upanishadic verse, which is almost similar to this verse, it says Natad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na vidyutaha. So there the word vidyuta is coming. So vidyuta is electricity. So whenever we see Srila Prabhupada quoting something like this, we can always be rest assured that somewhere in some of the Upanishad or somewhere else it is certainly mentioned. Prabhupada never does anything like that. So always in parampara. Yes. So then this Krishna is mentioning that param avyayam, that padam, that pad, which is avyayam, that pad, how it is that? It is not illuminated by sun, nor by moon, nor by fire. So illumination is there, but not because of these things. So why these things are mentioned is because we see now this is the evening part of the day, and we see that outside there are some electric bulbs glowing, or even in our rooms some electric bulbs are glowing. So we need something external source of illumination in this material world, because this material world is completely dark. So Srila Prabhupada explains that the spiritual world is actually fully illuminous. It is self-illumined. In the purport, Prabhupada explains that all the Vaikuntha planets and all the other planets which are a part of spiritual world, they are completely illuminated. And the source of that illumination is the Krishna Loka, or Krishna himself. So from that, all the illumination is pervaded. Only Prabhupada explains some portion of that which is covered by the Mahat Tattva is not illuminated. And which is that portion? The 1/4 portion, which is the part of the material world. So that is not covered over. Other thing else, everything is illuminated. And Krishna is mentioning another feature, that yad gatva na nivartante. Once you go to that place, which is my dham, tad dhama paramam mama. It is my dham, Krishna is saying. So my param dham, once you go there, you don't have to come back to this material world and again keep traveling up and down and here and there. So that is not required. So that is what is mentioned in this particular verse, yad gatva na nivartante. So please read first paragraph of this purport, the first bullet point.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with the devotees. those who are in Krishna consciousness, one should search out a society dedicated to Krishna consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service. In this way, he can cut off his attachment to the material world.
Okay, thank you. So here we can see that Prabhupada is giving us the hint. If you really want to cut down this tree, then although you may be attached in some way or the other to some part of this material world, still if you find out the devotees who are completely detached, then by association with such devotees and learning how to discharge devotional service, you can also cut off the attachment. Yes, and the next part of the purport is somewhat related to persons like me. One cannot become detached from the attraction of material world simply by dressing himself in saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, one should take it very seriously that devotional service, as described in the 12th chapter, is the only way to get out of this false representation of the real tree. In the 14th chapter, the contamination of all kinds of processes by material nature is described. Only devotional service is described as purely transcendental. So Prabhupada is making a very emphatic statement that you cannot give up the attraction of this material world by changing your position in the material world. So just like we say, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Grihe thako, vane thako, sada hari bole dako. Sukhe dukhe bhule nako, vadane hari naam korore. So whether you are in home and whether you are in one or in the forest, it doesn't matter. But what one has to do is Sada Hari Bole Dako. One has to learn to chant the holy name of the Lord. And only by that what will happen is Sukhe Dukhe Bhulanako Vadane Hari Naam Korore. We will not get bewildered by Sukha and Dukha, and thereby we can actually cut off all kinds of material attachment and become fully detached from material world and be attached to the lotus feet of the Krishna, to his holy name, to his devotees. And in this way, then there is a hope for us to cut down this big and bewildering material tree, banyan tree. Yeah. So point is that unless the jiva who is conditioned in this material world reaches this goal, he will never be satisfied in this world. He reaches this padam avyayam. So, and what is his swarupa in this padam avyayam? So that is explained. And what is his condition in this material world? That is also explained in the next verse. So here we complete the first section from verse number 1 to 6, wherein it is explained from material world to spiritual world by detachment and surrender. So are there any questions?
Ji, in this translation, it is said if one reaches Krishna Loka, he will never come back. Then how come the jivas are coming back? Can you just go back to the translation?
Yeah, just a minute.
Yeah, this one. Those who reaches it never returns to this material world.
So those who have reached there will never come, but there will always some other living entities. See, there are unlimited living entities in whole creation of the Lord, and every living entity has got the free will. Every living entity has got the free will. So actually, if we see that even our coming here is also big surprise. Once we study all these things, one may wonder, how did we leave that world in association with the Supreme Lord and his all so many wonderful exalted souls? So that actually cannot be explained. Prabhupada says that something happened. Now what that happened, that need not be discussed at a great length now. That will be revealed when we reach back. But the point is that one should now take up to the process once one understands that he has become conditioned. So take up the process of liberating oneself, and then once you are liberated and reach that stage, everything will be revealed to you. Or in other words, we can also say that it will not so much matter also once we reach back. But yes, free will is the only answer which we can say, because of which the living entities misuse the free will and think of enjoying separate from Krishna. So that's why even Srila Prabhupada and other acharyas, they explain that the first birth which living entity gets is that of Brahma, when he desires to enjoy independently of Krishna. He wants to create something of his own, like that. So then he is offered that post of Brahma to, yes, okay, go ahead and create and try to see if you can satisfy yourself. But at the end of the day, Brahma is also, if the living entity remains pure, the Brahma understands his whole folly, then he may go back to spiritual world after his one lifetime. If not, then he falls down further. So that is what is explained. So yes, the free will is the only answer we can say.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Any other question? Okay. So then the next verse, the 7th, from 7 to 11, the explanation is that what will happen if one doesn't surrenders. So I'll just go back to the overview, then you can see that. So if there is no detachment and it doesn't surrender, then what happens is bondage and transmigration. One has to undergo the bondage and then transmigration from one body to another body. Yeah. So let us recite. Mamaivamsho jivaloke.
Mamaivamsho jivaloke.
Jiva bhuta sanatana.
Jiva bhuta sanatana.
Manashashtanindriyani.
Manashashtandriyani.
Prakrtisthani karshati.
Prakrtisthani karshati.
Translation. Yes, translation.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
So here Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur very nicely explains, Mamai Vamsho Jiva Loke. Krishna is beating his chest and is saying, Are, these jivas are all my eternal part and parcels. But it's so unfortunate to see that Manashashtani Indriyani Prakrutisthani Karshati. They are struggling very hard with the six senses, which also includes the mind. So we can just imagine the situation of a father who sees in front of his eyes his own son or daughters leaving his own home and wandering in the street and struggling very hard to live. So what pain a father may get. So that is a pain Krishna is experiencing for all the jivas in this material world. So that is much more, just like Krishna in the section of Dhruva Maharaj, we see Suniti telling Dhruva Maharaj that you go to the Supreme Lord because he can offer you the love which even millions of mothers cannot offer. So similarly, the pain which a father or mother, like Dhruva's father, Uttanapad, he started feeling the pain of separation when he understood that actually Dhruva at the age of 5 has left the kingdom. So he certainly felt the pain. But as Krishna's love cannot be compared with the millions of mothers, similarly Krishna's pain for his own jivas cannot be compared to the millions of the pain felt by the parents of this material world for their children. So here Krishna is emphatically pointing out that these are all my living entities, these are all my part and parcel. But unfortunately, they are caught up in this material world and they are struggling very hard. So this is what we can see here. The heart of Krishna is being expressed. So in this verse number 7, 8, and 9, we can see that what is the power of the mind. If the power of the mind will determine the future of the jiva. So if he surrenders, then he goes back to spiritual world. If not, then prakriti sthani karshati. And this word karshati, what exactly, how he is struggling hard, is explained in next 4 verses. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport explains that how this eternal fragmental part is nothing but it's not like a material thing wherein we have a big piece of something from which we remove the small pieces and then the whole piece is gone. We saw that also previously in one of the verses. So here also Srila Prabhupada explains the same thing, that it's not that the fragmental part means everything is lost. No, not in that sense. Not in the sense of material thing, but it is a innate part of the fragmental part of the Lord. So that's why that nature is the same, Satchidananda, same nature as that of Lord. So Srila Prabhupada very nicely explains in the first part of the purport how that is happening. And in the second part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains the word karshati. So please read this part of the purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. The word karshati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up, as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. When the mind is in the mode of ignorance, he travels in the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body, with the mind and the senses, and when he is liberated, this material covering perishes. But his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, so Prabhupada is very nicely choosing specific words to explain this phenomenon, that how this word karshati is struggling or grappling hard. And we saw that how it is bound by chains. It's like, and these the chains are nothing but, we saw in the previous chapter, the 3 gold, silver and iron chains, So passion, goodness, and goodness, passion, and ignorance. So even if the chains are of gold, still he is bound. So that we saw in the previous chapter thoroughly. So similarly, the living entity, because of the chief agent being the mind, he's bound up. He's driving him in the material existence. But when one is liberated of this material covering, then his spiritual body remains, in its own capacity. Not that it merges or this and that, whatever all nonsense people have understanding about. So that thing doesn't happen. That is what Prabhupada wants to highlight, because that was the topic of the first paragraph of the purport. And yes, somebody can read the last paragraph of the purport. I have not put up in this slideshow, but it is also important. The words Mamai Vamsha, beginning with the words Mamai Vamsha.
The
Hare
words
Krishna.
Mami Vansha. Mataji, please go.
Yeah, carry on, Mataji. The words
The word
Mamai
Mami
Vamsha.
Okay. The words Mamai Vamshaha, the fragmental parts and parcel of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. The conception is not applicable here because the Sanskrit word Sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is present. Dehinosmin yata dehe. The fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in a spiritual planet, and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the part and parcel of gold are also gold. Hare Krishna.
So now Krishna will explain the word Karshati in 8, 9, 10, and 11. So now let us go with that. Shariram yadavapnoti.
Shariram yad avapnoti.
Yachapyutkramatishvara.
Yachapyutkramatishvara.
Gruhitvaitani sanyati.
Grihitvaitani sanyati.
Vayor gandhani vashayat.
Vayor gandhani vashayat.
Translation.
The living entities, correction. The living entity in the material world carries different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus takes one kind of body and again quits to take another.
Yeah. So this is simple to understand, not much to be discussed here. Only thing is we can see that how the Vayur Gandha Nivashayat, Krishna is giving this example that we see sometimes the air flowing over some filthy place, then some air carries the filthy aroma. But if it is traveling over a very beautiful rose garden, then it carries that wonderful aroma of the rose. So similarly, the living entity picks up the qualities based on what it is associating with, and then accordingly it gets its next birth. So if somebody is made his consciousness like that of a dog or cat, Prabhupada mentions, then he's sure to change to cat or dog body. So we see people really going to that animalistic consciousness. So then surely they are going to get animalistic bodies. And if they are going to have a godly consciousness, then they may take up into the body of a demigod or something. And if somebody has cultivated Krishna consciousness, then he may be transferred to the Krishna Loka or the spiritual world. This is a verse in Bhagavad Gita. I'm not recollecting, but Prabhupada has paraphrased this verse in this purport. So at one particular time, one of my elder uncle, when he passed away 2 years back, so I had gone to the final rites, and while they were burning the body, so there's a custom that they recite this 15th chapter. So because I was also there, so that Panditji over there, he told me that you recite 15th chapter now. So there was one more person with me. who was my uncle's friend or something. So then we both started reciting, and I was not confident. I was not fully by hearted all the verses. So I was taking the help of my mobile, although I could recite the verses, but not sure about the sequence. So I was looking in the mobile, and my brother-in-law was also there, and he after the whole ceremony was over, he just came to me and he said, "Arey, you still don't, you have not yet by hearted the 15th chapter." So I was a little bit, ashamed at that. Yeah, actually, what, not by hearted. Yeah, that's right. So as we are discussing about modes and all, so that time that thought came up, that I was about to reply him, the way Prabhupada used to say, that can you live one minute what is there in Bhagavad Gita, So in that way, the mode of passion was pressing me, but somehow or other I just kept quiet. And after that, my relative, after many days he was meeting me, so he was a little bit inquisitive, seeing my dress and all, and he came to me and says, "How all this thing is happening? I'm not understanding." So then I started explaining him the process of transmigration from second chapter, like how one gives up the old and torn cloths and takes up the new cloth. So then immediately my brother-in-law was also there beside, and he said, it is so easy to say like that, but when small children, they give up their body, what will say, torn cloth and all these things, But that is the point, that one may by heart verses of Bhagavad Gita or even the whole Vedas, but if one is not able to understand the essence of the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas, then one misses the point. So that is what I wanted to mention. So the whole purpose of this 15th chapter, Krishna is trying to tell us what is the essence, that one has to take shelter and surrender to Krishna and not just get carried away by the green leaves of the Vedic literatures. So now Krishna is mentioned here that based on his consciousness, he takes up to the new body. And what happens in the new body? So that Krishna will explain in the next verse. Shrotram chakshusparshanam cha rasanam ghranameva cha adhisthaya manaschayam vishayanupasevate.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I'll read the translation.
Yes, please.
The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects.
So we can understand that when sometimes we have to make some wooden furniture, so we call the carpenter and provide him necessary material, and he comes with his toolbox and does all kinds of work on that, and finally he makes the furniture, and then he goes back with his toolbox. So why does he goes back with his toolbox?
Because it is his toolbox.
Because he has to perform another furniture activity, he has to make some another item, so he goes back with his toolbox. So similarly, living entity, he comes in this material with this toolbox of all kinds of senses and does all kinds of activities, and then he goes back and gets another set of toolbox based on the whatever the body he is getting, and he continues his job of sense gratification. So here it is mentioned Vishayanupasevate. Vishayanupasevate means he again becomes a servant of the senses. Sevate, he serves whom? Vishayan, the objects of the senses. So in that sense, he becomes the servant of the senses by enjoying various sense objects. And adhishthaya manaschayam means what we can say that mana is that is mind is the it is grouped about the mind, as Srila Prabhupada mentioned. All these senses are grouped about the mind, means there is integration. All the inputs that are coming through various senses are going to the mind, and based on the likings and disliking of the mind will take the decision what is to be done and what is not to be done. So that is how the mind causes karshana, karshati, the struggle for the living entity, who is thinking himself to this body, who is thinking himself to be the mind. So that living entity is feeling the struggle like that. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that consciousness is originally pure like water, but if you mix water with a certain color, it changes. Similarly, consciousness is pure, for the spirit soul is pure, but the consciousness is changed according to the association with material qualities. And real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. So instead of now the question is, if the consciousness is tainted with some kind of color, so then what is the solution? Or we can say that, as Prabhupada is explaining about the water, water is mixed with some color. So now we want to purify the water. What is to be done?
Filtration, distillation.
Put some chemicals.
Alum.
Best solution is, even if you put alum, it will settle down and it will be there. So the best,
Distillation.
Distillation.
Evaporate it, Prabhuji, boil it.
The distillation also, what happens that the precipitate remains.
But the water gets purified and gets collected in another container. I mean, that's the science of it.
Yeah. So, but another best way of doing that is to add more water. So if the glass of water is there, in that some water, colored water is there, so you add more water, then what happens? The color reduces. So you add more water, the color more reduces. And you keep on adding that water, then finally clear water remains. So what does that mean? That you keep adding the soul's eternal constitutional position is that Satchidananda, its practice of devotional service, is its eternal condition. So you keep adding that condition, then slowly this contamination will go away. Like that. Okay. So again, what happens when the Jivatma is struggling like this with his senses? Where does he go? So, and who can understand this transmigration and who cannot understand this transmigration is explained in next two verses. Utkramantam sthitam vapi Gunjanam va gunanvitam Vimudha nanu pashyanti Pashyanti dhyana chakshushaha. Translation.
The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. Hare Krishna.
So remember, this word Jnana Chakshusha was also mentioned in chapter number 13, in verse number 35. Kshetra kshetra jnayor evam antaram jnana chakshusha bhuta prakriti moksham cha ye vidur yanti te param. So those who see with the eyes of knowledge, what? Kshetra kshetra jnayor etam. The difference between the kshetra and kshetrajya. and also can understand the process of liberation. Bhuta Prakrutim Moksham. So when he can understand this, when one sees in the eyes of knowledge, Jnana Chakshusha. So similarly here it is mentioned that the Vimudha Nanu Pashyanti, the fools cannot understand. What the fool cannot understand? That how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys. So all these things a fool cannot understand. Whereas one who has got the eyes trained in the knowledge, Jnana Chakshusha, only can he understand. So one is blinded by the material desires. That's why he is Vimudha. And that's why he cannot understand this particular thing. Yes, somebody can read the first part of the purport. I don't have it on my slide, so you can read from the book.
Hare Krishna. The word Jnana Chakshusha is very significant. Without knowledge, one cannot understand how a living entity leaves his present body, nor what form of body he is going to take in the next life, nor even why he is living in a particular type of body. This requires a great amount of knowledge understood from Bhagavad Gita and similar literatures, heard from a bona fide spiritual master. One who is trained to perceive all these things is fortunate.
Okay, fine. So we can also see this in terms of that how when Sanatana Goswami, he approached Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is begging at the feet of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he's saying that Ke ami, ke amar jati tapatre. I don't know who am I. Although people in this world call me a great scholar, great learned person, but I am such a fool that I don't know who I am. And why am I suffering in this material world? Why there are threefold miseries inflicted upon me? So all these things I am not aware. So this is the way to approach a spiritual master with this submissive mood. And when one approaches in this way, then the spiritual master enlightens and he gives us the real knowledge. And from that one can understand. Then one can get the eyes to see the things in perspective of this knowledge. Then one sees the things as they are. We saw that in the 14th chapter also, that seeing things as they are, because of that knowledge, even in the person who is in mode of goodness is able to see to some extent things as they are. So this Jnana Chakshu is very, very important. Yes. And then finally in the last verse in this section, Yatanto yoginaschainam Pasyantyatmanyavasthitam Yatantopyakritatmano Nainam Pashyantya Chetasah. Yes, translation.
The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try.
So, Pashyanti Atmani Avasthitam. The question is, what is the difference that a Vimuda cannot see and a Jnana person having Jnana Chakshu can see? So, what is that? Pashyanti Atmani Avasthitam. The person with Jnana Chakshu can see self, in the self, situated in the self. So he can see the soul different from the body, Kshetra and Kshetragya, he knows that difference. And he can see that how the modes are acting. And he can see that how the soul is actually non-doer. And then he can see that the real thing is to surrender to the Supreme Lord. So he's situated on the platform of the soul. So this is how we can see. So yatantopi krutatmano nainam pashyanti achetasaha. But those who are achetasaha, those whose consciousness is not developed, then they cannot see. yatante api, even after endeavoring. Even after endeavoring, they cannot see. So that is what also is mentioned by Prahlad Maharaj. At verse he says, I'm sorry, I'm not able to recollect the verse, but he says, Parataswatova, Matirna Krishne Parataswatova, Mitho Vipateta Graha Vratana, Adanta Govir Vishtanta Mishram, Punah Charvita Charvana. So, Matirna Krishne Parataswatova. The Mati on Krishna cannot be situated by Parataswatova, by somebody else's influence or even by one's own endeavors. To whom those who are Graha Vratanam, those who are too much attached to family life, and they are Punah Charvita Charvananam, they are again and again chewing the chewed. For such persons, it is very, very difficult. So same thing Krishna is mentioning here. So although they may endeavor, but because they are achetasaha, their mind is not completely developed, they are not yet asanga shastrena dridana chitva has not happened to them, they are guna sangasya, then they cannot see things as they are. So we can see one example that the doctors, when the patients come to them, they see that the patient is suffering. But some or other, not all, but some of them we can say, some doctors, they don't think it to be a universal principle. They see the suffering as the means of their livelihood. So that is Pashyanti Achetasaha. But Jnana Chakshusha is what? Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. If a doctor is enlivened with this transcendental knowledge, when he sees the sufferings of the patients, he will see this Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. He will see that this is such a great suffering, not only for this patient who has come to me, but to all the living entities of this world. But because he is not in that consciousness, then he becomes achetasa. He only sees this suffering of the patient as a means of his livelihood. Yeah, so that is what we can say about the people who are who is knowing and who is not knowing. Yes, somebody can read the translation.
The endeavoring transcendentalist. Sorry, please go ahead, Mataji.
Mataji, should I read, Mataji?
Yeah, please, Mataji. Please, Mataji.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mataji. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. Hare Krishna.
I'm sorry, I forgot to say I wanted somebody to read the purport. Purport can be read.
I'll read Prabhuji. 15.11. Purpose.
Yes.
There are many transcendentalists on the path of spiritual self-realization, but one who is not situated in self-realization cannot see how things are changing in the body of the living entity. The word yogina is significant in this connection. In the present day, there are many so-called yogis and there are many so-called associations of yogis, but they're actually blind in the matter of self-realization. They're simply addicted to some sort of gymnastic exercise and are satisfied if the body is well built and healthy. They have no other information. They are called yatantopya pyakritatmana. Yatantopyakritatmana. Even though they are endeavoring in so-called yoga system, they are not self-realized. Such people cannot understand the process of the transmigration of the soul. Only those who are actually in the yoga system and have realized the self, the world, and the Supreme Lord, in other words, the Bhakti yogis, those engaged in pure devotional service and Krishna consciousness, can understand how things are taking place. Hare Krishna.
Okay, fine. So here we conclude the two sections of this particular chapter. So are there any questions?
Prabhuji, I have one question.
Yeah.
You were mentioning that the Jnani, the one with Jnana Chaksha is the one who can see four things. One is he can see soul different from body, how modes are acting, that the soul is non-doer. What is the fourth one, Prabhuji? I couldn't make a note.
The fourth thing is the transmigration of the soul, how it happens.
Thank
you. What is mentioned, the subject matter in this particular context. Okay, any other question?
Oh, my one question was there regarding this 15th chapter. As you are mentioning, one place that this is the essence of all Vedic knowledge described by Krishna. So we see in outside people also, they very much emphasize on Bhagavad Gita, specifically on 15th chapter. So on what basis they emphasize on 15th chapter? Means they know that this is the essence of Veda, or what?
God knows. Just now we discussed that people, they may have by hearted the 15th chapter or 12th chapter, but how much they really understand the essence, that is a big question. So I also don't know, based on what people say, that yes, 15th chapter, maybe it is a, coming as a cultural part of our, great Vedic society. Earlier times people were aware about the importance of this chapter and the essence given in this chapter. So that's why that culturally it is carried ahead. That's what I feel. Otherwise, many times people, they say, but practically if we go and ask them what is the essence of this chapter, only those who have read Prabhupada's purport will be able to answer this. But otherwise, others will not be able to understand. Not even those who have read Prabhupada's purports. Those who have thoroughly understood it through some other person who is aware of this, and one who is practicing it will only actually understand the essence of this chapter. So like that.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam Prabhuji. Prabhuji, when a person in Krishna consciousness at the time of death, but he is in some mode, Prabhuji. For example, he is in the mode of passion. So what kind of birth he will get, Prabhuji, in other lifetime? Whether he will born in the same Krishna conscious family or some other thing?
Person in Krishna consciousness cannot be in mode of passion.
No, Prabhuji, I'm saying that at the time of death.
Yes,
because
even at
he's
the time
just
of death,
now
he will be in
started.
mode of passion. Person in Krishna consciousness is always in Krishna consciousness. How can he be in mode of passion?
Okay.
So person practicing Krishna Bhakti, trying to reach that level of Krishna consciousness, may be in either of the three modes. So I understood your question, but I just wanted to emphasize the point. Many times we very plainly use these words. So when we say person in Krishna consciousness, means Krishna consciousness, then he is beyond the modes. So person practicing devotional service who is yet to achieve full Krishna consciousness may be in either of the three modes. And now let's go to the point that if he is in mode of passion, then what will happen?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, right.
Yeah. So then Krishna has assured that one who is taking to this path of Krishna consciousness, there is no fear to gliding down. Is that verse in the 2nd chapter?
Neha Vikramanashasti Pratyavaya.
Yes. Neha Vikramanashasti Pratyavayo na vidyate. Swalpam api asya dharmasya prayate mahato. So one who has taken to this path of Krishna consciousness, although he may be not yet fully purified, but there is no fear of gliding down. And then in 6th chapter we see Yatanta Yoginas Chaiva, one who is endeavoring in this path of yoga, bhakti yoga. So there may be a situation Arjuna only asked that question. So I hope you might have undergone the 6th chapter. So there Arjuna only asked the question, what will happen if the person who is not the part of the material world and he is practicing yoga to elevate himself to spiritual world, but he has not completely successful in this spiritual practice and he leaves his body, then what will happen? Will he perish like a ribbon cloud? That is the question of Arjuna. Like we see in the, sometimes in the sky, the clouds are there and sometimes the one of the cloud, it remains behind and then it is, perished by winds. So will that happen to that soul who has given up the activities of material world, but not yet achieved fully Krishna consciousness? So then Krishna answers that if his practice is long-standing, first Krishna answers, if his practice is short-standing, then he may get birth in
Suchi and Srimat.
Yes, Shuchinam Shrimatam Gehe. And if his practice is long-standing, then he gets birth in the family of devotees. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport humbly says, and we had a good fortune to be born in the family of a devotee of my own father. So, and like that Prabhupada mentions. So the point is, there is no fear for a devotee because Krishna is saying that my devotee never finishes. Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Oh my dear Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee will never perish. So we all need not fear about some degradation. What we have to fear is about this current life, how we are practicing, and especially fear about committing offenses unto the lotus feet of Vaishnavas. Because Krishna consciousness is so powerful that in the beginning stage only it clears all the sinful activities which has been accumulated for so many lifetimes. But one who commits offenses, then the effects of sinful activities remains. So just like we see in the pastime of Jagai Madhai also, when Jagai Madhai was forgiven, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu embraced both of them and Mahaprabhu's body became completely black. And Mahaprabhu said, all their sins have come to me now. And then now you chant Hare Krishna. And they all chant Hare Krishna. And after that, again, Mahaprabhu becomes golden. And he says, now all the sins have gone. And where these sins will go? One who offends my devotee, these sins will go to them. So the point is to be aware about and be cautious about not committing offenses and continuing our practice of Krishna consciousness steadily with determination and asanga shastrena, with the acts of detachment. Okay?
Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Is there any other question? Okay, so we'll conclude here and we'll meet on Friday at 6:30 p.m. Thank you all very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.